What I'm about to tell you is going to sound absolutely insane, and when you see the footage from tonight's Raw, you're going to question whether WWE has completely lost control of their own show or if this is the most brilliant chaos they've orchestrated in years. Jon Moxley, the unhinged, unpredictable, dangerous former AEW World Champion who just shocked the entire wrestling industry by showing up in WWE, just brutally ambushed Bron Breakker backstage on Monday Night Raw in one of the most vicious attacks we've seen on WWE television in recent memory. And here's what should make your blood absolutely boil: this wasn't some carefully choreographed segment with crash pads and safety protocols. This looked like a legitimate street fight where Moxley went completely off script and attacked Breakker with the kind of intensity that blurs the line between performance and actual violence. Bron Breakker, the monster powerhouse who has been destroying everyone in his path for months, was left laid out and bleeding while Moxley walked away like he just made a statement that's going to change the entire power structure of Monday Night Raw. If this doesn't make you want to explode in the comments about what this means for WWE, for AEW, for the future of wrestling itself, then you're not understanding the magnitude of what just happened. Smash that like button right now if you can't believe WWE actually let this happen. Drop a comment telling me if you think this is a shoot or a work, because honestly I can't tell anymore. And make sure you subscribe, because what happens next with Jon Moxley in WWE is going to be absolute must-see chaos that you cannot afford to miss. Let me start by explaining how we even got to this point, because Jon Moxley being in WWE at all is something that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Moxley, who performed as Dean Ambrose in WWE from 2011 to 2019, left the company in one of the most bitter and public departures in wrestling history. He gave interviews absolutely destroying WWE's creative process, their medical care, their treatment of talent, and basically everything about how the company operated. Moxley talked about feeling like a prisoner, about being scripted to the point where he couldn't even sound like himself anymore, about having his creative input ignored and being forced to perform terrible material that made him look foolish. He was so done with WWE that he explicitly said he would never return, that he'd rather retire from wrestling entirely than go back to that environment. When Moxley went to AEW in 2019, he became one of the foundational stars of that company, the guy who legitimized AEW in the eyes of many fans as a true alternative to WWE rather than just an independent promotion with money. Moxley won the AEW World Championship multiple times, main event their biggest shows, and positioned himself as the face of the company in many ways. He embraced the creative freedom AEW offered, doing violent hardcore matches, cutting intense unscripted promos, and generally being the version of himself that WWE never allowed him to be. For years, Moxley was synonymous with AEW in the same way John Cena was synonymous with WWE, making his appearance on Raw tonight one of the most shocking crossover moments in wrestling history. The circumstances of how Moxley ended up in WWE are still murky and probably won't be fully clear for days or weeks as more information leaks out. What we know is that Moxley's AEW contract was apparently coming up for renewal. There were reported tensions between him and AEW management about various issues including creative direction and the handling of certain backstage situations, and WWE under Triple H's creative leadership has been much more open to bringing back former talent who left on bad terms. Multiple reports suggested that WWE had been quietly reaching out to Moxley for months, testing whether he'd be open to returning now that the Vince McMahon era is over and the company is being run by people Moxley actually respects. Most people assumed those talks would go nowhere given how publicly Moxley burned those bridges, but clearly something changed. Some offer was made that was too good to refuse, or some situation developed that made returning to WWE the right move for Moxley personally and professionally. Bron Breakker being the target of Moxley's first attack is significant and tells us a lot about what WWE's plans might be for this angle. Breakker is the next-generation monster, the son and nephew of WWE legends Rick and Scott Steiner, a genetic freak with incredible strength and agility who's been positioned as an unstoppable force on Raw. At only 26 years old, Breakker has already held multiple championships and has been protected heavily by WWE Creative as someone they're building the entire brand around for the next decade. He's exactly the kind of young, hungry, legitimate athlete that WWE wants as their next John Cena or Roman Reigns. Having Jon Moxley specifically target Breakker sends the message that Moxley isn't back to have nostalgia matches with his old Shield buddies or to do a quick run for a paycheck. He's back to establish dominance, to prove he's still the most dangerous man in wrestling, and to potentially position himself as the final boss that young stars like Breakker have to overcome to reach the next level. What actually happened on Raw was absolute chaos from the moment it started. The show was in the middle of a normal segment. I believe it was some kind of interview or backstage promo with Breakker talking about his dominance and his next challenger. The segment was proceeding normally when suddenly there was a commotion off camera, sounds of crashing and yelling, and the camera operators clearly weren't sure what was happening or where to point their cameras. There was genuine confusion and panic in the voices of the production people that you could hear faintly in the background, which added to the sense that something unplanned was occurring. The camera finally swung around to show a figure in black attacking Breakker from behind, and it took a few seconds before anyone realized it was Jon Moxley because he wasn't announced. There was no entrance music, there was no setup whatsoever. Moxley's attack on Breakker was relentless and brutal in a way that felt different from typical WWE violence. Moxley wasn't throwing worked punches that look good for camera but don't actually hurt. He was hitting Breakker with elbows and forearms that connected with real impact, the kind of strikes that echoed through the backstage area and made everyone watching wince. Breakker, to his credit, tried to fight back and defend himself, but he was caught completely off guard and couldn't generate any momentum before Moxley had him on the defensive. Moxley threw Breakker into equipment cases, into walls, into anything and everything that was nearby. He grabbed a steel chair at one point and absolutely brutalized Breakker with chair shots that looked stiff and legitimate. There was none of the usual telegraphing or pulling of shots that you see in scripted WWE segments. This looked like a man who genuinely wanted to hurt someone and was using every weapon at his disposal to do it. The most shocking moment came when Moxley had Breakker down on the concrete floor and started raining down elbows to his head in a ground and pound style that's more UFC than WWE. Breakker's face was visibly cut and bleeding, whether from a planned blade job or from legitimately being busted open by Moxley's strikes is unclear and frankly doesn't matter because the visual impact was the same either way. Blood was pouring down Breakker's face as Moxley continued the assault, screaming at him about respect and proving points and establishing dominance, though the audio was chaotic enough that it was hard to make out everything Moxley was saying. WWE officials and security finally arrived to pull Moxley off of Breakker, but even then Moxley fought against them, trying to get back to Breakker to continue the beating. It took multiple people to physically restrain Moxley and drag him away from the scene while medical personnel attended to the bloody and battered Bron Breakker. The immediate aftermath was handled in a way that added to the sense that this was at least partially a shoot rather than a fully worked angle. There was no immediate replay shown, no commentary team trying to put over what just happened with prepared talking points. Instead, there was genuine chaos as the show tried to figure out how to proceed. Raw general manager Adam Pearce appeared on screen looking legitimately rattled, not like an authority figure in control of his show but like someone whose event just got hijacked by a dangerous individual. Pearce announced that Jon Moxley had been removed from the building by security and that there would be serious consequences for his actions, but the delivery lacked conviction because clearly nobody including Pearce knew exactly what was going to happen next or how WWE management wanted this situation handled. The fan reaction in the arena was absolutely electric and confused in equal measure. There were massive pops because Jon Moxley showing up in WWE is inherently exciting for wrestling fans who've wanted to see him back in that environment. But there was also genuine concern for Bron Breakker's well-being because the attack looked so vicious and so realistic that people weren't sure if they should be cheering for the entertainment value or worried about someone being legitimately hurt. The crowd noise was chaotic, a mixture of holy shit chants, Moxley chants, and concerned murmuring that created this incredible atmosphere of uncertainty and excitement. That's the kind of crowd reaction you can't manufacture with scripted promos and predetermined matches. That only happens when something feels genuinely unpredictable and dangerous. Social media absolutely exploded the moment this attack happened, with Twitter trending worldwide within minutes and wrestling forums crashing from the traffic of people trying to discuss what they just witnessed. The takes were all over the map, ranging from people declaring this the greatest WWE moment in years to people accusing the company of being irresponsible and dangerous with how they presented the attack. Some fans were convinced this was entirely a shoot, that Moxley went into business for himself and attacked Breakker for real for reasons we don't understand yet. Others insisted it had to be a work because WWE wouldn't air footage of a legitimate assault on their programming. The debate was intense and passionate, with everyone trying to figure out where the line between reality and performance was in what we just watched. Let's talk about what this means for WWE's creative direction and their relationship with AEW because this is where things get really interesting from a business perspective. If Jon Moxley is actually signed to WWE, which seems to be the case given that they aired his attack on their programming, that represents a massive talent acquisition from their main competitor. Moxley was one of AEW's top stars, someone they built their company around, and losing him to WWE is a significant blow to AEW's credibility and their ability to position themselves as the alternative. It sends a message to other AEW talent that WWE under Triple H is a viable option again for people who left during the Vince McMahon era, which could trigger more talent movement between companies. WWE is clearly not afraid to raid AEW's roster if they think someone is valuable enough, and Moxley definitely qualifies as valuable enough. From AEW's perspective, losing Moxley to WWE is absolutely catastrophic for their narrative about being the place where wrestlers go for creative freedom and respect. Moxley was the poster child for AEW as a haven for WWE refugees, the guy who most publicly and aggressively criticized WWE and praised AEW as the better alternative. Having him return to WWE completely undermines that narrative and raises questions about whether AEW is actually the paradise for wrestlers that they've been positioning themselves as. There are going to be a lot of uncomfortable questions asked to AEW management about what went wrong in their relationship with Moxley and why they couldn't keep one of their foundational stars when WWE came calling. The locker room dynamics that this creates are fascinating to consider. Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Jon Moxley were the Shield, arguably the most successful faction in WWE history, and three guys who came up through the system together and helped define WWE's last decade. Moxley returning to WWE means potential Shield reunions, potential Shield feuds, all kinds of storytelling possibilities that fans have been dreaming about since Moxley left. But there's also going to be genuine tension because Moxley burned bridges on his way out, said negative things about the company and potentially about his former Shield brothers, and now he's back expecting everyone to welcome him with open arms. Seth Rollins in particular has been vocal about defending WWE against criticism from former talent, so his reaction to Moxley's return is going to be crucial in establishing what kind of story WWE wants to tell with this angle. Bron Breakker's positioning coming out of this attack is equally important. In wrestling, how you respond to being attacked defines your character potentially more than anything else. If Breakker comes back next week furious and seeking revenge, attacking Moxley with equal brutality, that establishes him as someone who won't be intimidated or back down, someone who rises to challenges rather than being broken by them. That's the response that makes him look strong and maintains his monster status. But if Breakker sells fear or hesitation about facing Moxley again, if he seems traumatized or reluctant to engage, that damages everything WWE has built with his character over the past year. The next few weeks of television are going to be critical in determining whether Breakker comes out of this feud elevated or diminished. The match implications are obvious and exciting. Jon Moxley vs. Bron Breakker is a dream match that nobody knew they wanted until right now, a perfect clash of styles between Moxley's brawling, intense, violent approach and Breakker's explosive power and athleticism. Their eventual singles match, presumably at a major premium live event, has the potential to be an instant classic that steals the show and creates a star-making moment for whoever wins. WWE would be smart to build to that match slowly, letting the tension and animosity escalate over weeks or months rather than rushing to blow it off at the next pay-per-view. This is a feud that could main event WrestleMania if they handle it correctly, and it's the kind of fresh matchup that WWE desperately needs to keep their product feeling unpredictable and exciting. Paul Heyman's potential involvement in this situation is worth speculating about because Heyman has history with both men. Heyman was instrumental in the Shield's presentation and development during their original run, serving as a creative consultant who helped shape their characters and their storylines. He's also someone who appreciates intensity and violence in wrestling, who would absolutely love what Moxley just did to Breakker because it felt real and dangerous. Could Heyman position himself as an advocate for Moxley, bringing his services and his strategic mind to help Moxley navigate his return to WWE? Or could he align with Breakker, helping the young monster prepare for war against a veteran like Moxley who has experience in every type of violent match imaginable? Either direction creates interesting possibilities for storytelling and character development. The hardcore wrestling element that Moxley brings with him is something WWE has been largely moving away from in recent years as they've tried to position themselves as more family-friendly and less reliant on blood and extreme violence. But Moxley's entire identity as a performer is built around being willing to go to places other wrestlers won't, around embracing violence and brutality as tools for storytelling. That fundamental clash between what Moxley wants to do as a performer and what WWE typically allows on their programming is going to create interesting tension. Will WWE let Moxley be the violent, unhinged character he was in AEW and in his independent work, or will they try to tone him down and make him more palatable for their audience? The answer to that question will determine whether Moxley's WWE return is successful or disappointing. The timing of this return is also strategically significant because WWE is heading into their major season with Survivor Series coming up and then the road to WrestleMania beginning shortly after. Having Jon Moxley on the roster for that crucial period gives them a legitimate main event level talent they can plug into major storylines and marquee matches. Moxley can work with anyone, can have great matches in any style, and brings an edge and unpredictability that makes everything he's involved in feel more important. WWE clearly sees value in having him back for this specific period, and his presence will almost certainly elevate whatever storylines he's part of through sheer force of his intensity and commitment. There's also the question of whether this is a short-term deal or a long-term commitment from both sides. Did Moxley sign a multi-year contract that suggests he's back in WWE for the foreseeable future, or is this a limited appearance deal that allows him to make an impact and then potentially return to AEW or go back to working independently? The structure of his deal will influence how WWE uses him creatively. If they know they only have him for 3 or 6 months, they'll probably push him hard immediately and get as much value as possible during that window. If he's signed long-term, they can be more patient with his booking and build toward bigger payoffs down the line. The ripple effects throughout the entire wrestling industry are already being felt. Independent promotions that were hoping to book Jon Moxley are now out of luck if he's exclusive to WWE. AEW has to completely restructure their creative plans that were built around Moxley being one of their top stars. Other AEW talent are probably getting calls from WWE to test their interest in making similar moves. The competitive landscape between the two companies just shifted significantly, and how AEW responds in the coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether they can maintain momentum or whether this is the beginning of a talent exodus that damages them long term. So here we are, just hours after Jon Moxley ambushed Bron Breakker in one of the most vicious backstage attacks Monday Night Raw has seen in years. The wrestling world is absolutely reeling from the implications of Moxley being back in WWE, from the brutality of the attack itself, from the questions about what happens next with both men and with the broader competitive landscape between WWE and AEW. This is the kind of moment that changes everything, that creates before and after periods in wrestling history, that fans will remember and discuss for years regardless of how the storyline ultimately plays out. Bron Breakker has been put on notice that there are levels to this business and that Jon Moxley operates on a level of intensity and violence that few others can match. WWE has made a statement that they're willing to bring in anyone, even former critics who left on terrible terms, if it makes their product better and creates compelling television. And the entire industry has been reminded that in wrestling, anything can happen at any moment, that the lines between reality and performance are always blurrier than they appear, and that genuine unpredictability is the most valuable commodity there is. Drop your comments right now telling me if you think this attack was a shoot or a work, whether you think Moxley or Breakker benefits more from this feud, and what you want to see happen next. Make sure you're subscribed because the fallout from this is going to dominate wrestling for weeks or months, and you absolutely need to be here for every twist, every turn, every moment of chaos that Jon Moxley brings to Monday Night Raw. This is just the beginning of something huge, and we're all witnessing history being made in real time.